right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our latest session of Interfor Academy. And I appreciate all of our friends, associates, clients, and interestingly enough, a fair share of competitors joining us today. So welcome to everyone. I see on our list that we have a extensive list of clients from the corporate world, from local law enforcement, from federal law enforcement, from global intelligence groups and foreign intelligence groups. So welcome to everyone. We're very excited to have this session and tackle a very important topic. So before I hand over to Jeremy and then back to us, I'd like to say, please be sure to ask your questions. There's the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens, and please do so at your leisure. Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Don, and great to be with you all once again for the final installment of our intelligence briefing series before we take a little bit of a summer break. I think this last one, as we wrap up the series before that summer break, is a really important and timely one for reasons that are a little bit unfortunate, but we'll get into all those details. I think we have two really incredible experts to talk about these important issues today, and I'm really delighted to be in conversation with them. Let's start off with Don Aviv. Most of you know Don, but I'll do a quick introduction here. Don is the CEO of Interfor International. He manages Interfor's global security consulting and threat monitoring divisions, and he's overseen hundreds of security-related deployments. Don formerly served as the vice chairman of ASIS International Security Services Council, and he sits on numerous corporate boards and is an advisor to several security technology startups and nonprofits. How are you today, Don?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Great, great. Mark Sullivan. I'm delighted to have Mark with us today. Mark served as the 22nd director of the U.S. Secret Services from 2006 to 2013. Mark managed over 7,000 special agents and supporting staff members and oversaw an annual budget of nearly $1.7 billion. During his tenure at the U.S. Secret Service, he was responsible for the protection of the president, the vice president, former presidents and their families, and other government leaders and visiting heads of state. His leadership and professional accomplishments have led to numerous awards, including 2 Distinguished Presidential Rank Awards, a Department of Homeland Security Secretary's Award, and the department's Gold Medal for Distinguished Services. Mark sits on a variety of corporate boards. He consults regularly and speaks publicly on a variety of security issues, including financial and intellectual property investigations, major event planning, and quite a few other things. I could go on and on here. Mark, so glad to have you with us today. How are you?
Fine. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for the invitation.
It's our pleasure. So let's jump into things. I want to keep things a little bit broad. And, the title of this briefing is Corporate Security in a Time of Ideological Violence. And I want to start broad and invite you both to comment on what this title means to you and why it is an era of ideological violence. I want to note that Interfor International is about to publish a white paper on this subject. And Mark, you answered this in the white paper. I want to start with you. But I wonder if you could share with us your view on how the assassination in December of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, has kind of signaled a change in the security landscape for security executives. So I'll start with you, and then we'll get Don's view on that subject.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, first of all, I think that it brought just a greater degree of awareness. I think everybody on this call understood and was aware of just how important their roles are and how important security is for executives. I'm not sure that everybody in the corporate world, in the executive world, non-security world, were quite aware of that. And I just think it brought to light just how important it is to keep these leaders safe and that they are a target, depending on the vertical they're in. There's a lot of controversial issues. There's a lot of things going on in these industries that are getting the attention of people in a very negative way. So I think, for me, the main thing was the awareness that it brought in the receding reaction from people. I think that I've seen more people doing threat assessments. I've seen more sensitivity to where people are traveling to. So I just think that there's a greater awareness, a greater recognition that these executives are targets and that they do need to be protected.
Don, your thoughts, please.
I agree with Mark, and I agree across the board, but I will say, for the most part, and those of us that are security professionals, investigative professionals, the issues remain the same. I mean, we're dealing with the same issues globally that we have for, decades, as far as threats to executives, threats to elected officials, threats to corporate officers, threats to just about anyone, even in the private and public sectors. The issues that we're dealing with now are just more, or have been amplified by these, spectacular, in your face, broadly publicized attacks and incidences. And they're not just, the assassination of the United Healthcare professional, but also, what we're seeing on the streets of New York and in LA and in Germany, where I'm sitting right now, and in France. We're seeing these things everywhere. There's just been a lot more virality and a lot more, it's louder, negative sentiment. And I think that's what we in our side of the house have to ingest and digest and analyze from a broader perspective.
So I want to talk about some of those traditional threats that you mentioned. We'll get to that, but I just want to stay here for a bit longer because I feel like pressing you guys on this subject is important because something feels like it changed in terms of not only the idea of ideological violence becoming more prevalent, but its acceptance. We note in the white paper that especially among a more youthful cohort, the acceptance of ideological violence, the approval. I don't want to use the individual's name in particular to glorify that person who attacked the United Healthcare CEO. And then, Don, as you're referencing, the other attacks that have happened targeting Jews in America and abroad have been cheered by some quarters. So as to people who focus on protecting executives, how do you reckon with the fact that a portion of the population approves of these attacks and maybe even, would provide support for something like that? Don't mean to kind of, have you put on your sociologist hat, but want to ask about your thoughts on it generally. Don, why don't we stay with you and then we'll get to Mark right after.
I mean, I would say that, these are issues that have always existed. And I think for the most part, there's always been a portion of society and societies in general that have cheered on these types of actions and activities. So that is nothing new. I think the main differentiator is the fact that we now live in a social media world and an interconnected world unlike ever before. So what we're seeing, what one person tweets about or posts about in the middle of nowhere gets amplified around the world if it's horrific enough, if it's nasty enough, and if it's their supporters or adherents agree with them. So it's not so much that we're in a greater or more divided world, or we're dealing with issues that we haven't in the past. It's just now everyone has a soapbox, everyone has an amplifier, and everyone has the ability to yell, and that yell can be heard far and wide. And I think that is the change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mark, you've protected presidents and politicians who have had unpopular views and moments. Do you agree with Don that it's social media that has fundamentally changed things, or what do you attribute this, real change in society approving this type of ideological violence to?
No, I think that Don brings up a good point there. I mean, obviously that's a pretty sad commentary on where we are in the world today. That you'd have people with these type of views. I mean, you see so much self-radicalization going on now. Somebody in their basement, the door is shut, and they're online, and they're getting self-radicalized. And to see that they have such a intense interest in one belief or another, that the murder of somebody is something that's a good thing and that's going to be cheered by other people, is just really surprising to me. And quite frankly, not just people that are out there that we know have nefarious intent, but even just everyday people that were cheering on some of these killings, to me was the most jarring aspect. I mean, these are everyday people that we might even be talking to, and because they're so upset about where the state of healthcare is, that it was almost like an opinion by some people that serves them right. And I think that's something we really have to work through, and it makes everybody's job just that much more difficult when you're protecting somebody in a certain vertical that just does create that much controversy, that much hate. And we can monitor social media all we want. We can have a really strong intelligence network. We can be sharing a lot of information, but it's going to be that lone wolf, that lone actor that is just out there that has a grievance or is paying attention. Don's point about social media. I think people are really smart that are posting out there. They know what line not to cross as far as making something threatening, but it can be very, very concerning. And we just don't know who's reading that and what is it influencing them to do.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more some of those details regarding technology here, but Don alluded to something earlier too about you guys have protected people for many years, and while ideological violence is generating a lot of headlines and is making all of our work more difficult, and it's deeply concerning what we're talking about here. The threat remains highest to executives, to celebrities, to athletes, high net worth individuals from more traditional threats. And those are maladjusted individuals, mentally unstable individuals who fixate on some of these people, insider threats, disgruntled employees. Can you talk a little bit about that world? Many people on here work in corporate security have some sense of it. But as we're thinking about an era of ideological violence, we still have these traditional threats. Mark, let's stay with you first, and then we'll go to Don.
Yeah, you mentioned insider risk. You work for a company that has maybe 10,000 layoffs, or the CEO made a decision that people aren't happy with. So what is that doing to somebody in the workforce? I'm seeing more and more people emailing CEOs and other executives directly, and some of these email communications are troubling. Some are not quite threatening, but they are concerning, and that's why I think it's so important to take every one of these situations seriously, to really have a strong relationship with your HR people, with your general counsel. I mean, this is not just an issue for security. This is an issue that really deserves to have the full force of that organization, and having the HR people and having the security people and the general counsel people working together and determine, do we have a problem, employee, or do we have an employee with the problem? And then the other thing we need to think about is just, random crime. Might not be any direction of interest, but just what are we walking into, and what type of random crime could somebody be walking into that, again, there's no direction and there's no intent by anybody. They just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mark, also about, good security being kind of a team approach. It's not just the security individuals who are, only responsible. And it goes beyond kind of, if you see something, say something, HR, general counsel, other members of the C-suite need to be security minded and support the CSO and the rest of the team. Don, over to you in terms of more traditional threats and how that fits into ideological violence.
I mean, at the end of the day, while the assassinations and these, glorified or over glorified attacks are catching, wind and being widely discussed, at the end of the day, disgruntled employees or former employees, current employees remain the greatest risk to any organization, whether you're a local company or a global company. And just from our perspective, from the investigative and intelligence monitoring perspective, we continue to see huge spikes in, threats coming from disgruntled employees, both, former and current, because, their livelihoods have been changed or impacted. They're having difficulties readjusting into a post-COVID world. They feel that they can just reach out, to Mark's point, and touch their CEO or C-suite, and they feel entitled in some new way that we really haven't experienced in the pre-COVID world. And I think that remains a growing concern. And so working from home just amplified everything. I mean, I think our internal statistics, which are not, scientific by any stretch, but reflect, a good stretch of or spread of the Fortune 500, we see just all these work from home or formerly or currently working from home employees that just haven't been able to readjust into this new world. And so from that, we're analyzing and assessing spikes in threats. And now you can just email, tweet at, reach out, and then, voice your concern. And that concern becomes amplified. So, but those are the ones that are actually reaching out. We're more concerned about the person who's just boiling and stirring and in an EDP or an emotionally disturbed person who's having a medical or mental issue, and then they take things into their own hands. So it's very hard to keep tabs on all these things, but that's why a full stack of integrated security and intelligence within an organization is critical, both externally and internally.
Yeah, that's so important, Don, and that includes, threat monitoring, that includes workplace violence prevention, that includes business continuity planning in case of a situation. Businesses during this era of ideological violence, and because of the continued threats that we've been protecting for many years on, should be planning for that high impact, low likelihood event that could deeply affect their business. Two quick kind of housekeeping notes as we continue on. We just put it in the chat there. We want to mention that we will be taking some questions, so we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen there. We'll look forward to those. And also want to share that Don and I co-authored a piece that appeared in The Hill this morning on the subject of ideological violence, and I want to encourage all of you to read that. We posted about it in LinkedIn. We'll put it in the chat, and we'll be sure to send it to you in a follow-up email as well. But just wanted to highlight that. Let's turn to the question now of technology. Technology really feels like a double-edged sword. We write about in the piece on how social media has done some good things, but has largely been a curse in many ways when you think about some of this stuff. Let's talk a little bit about technology. It provides security experts with new tools to monitor threats and maybe even mitigate them, but it also helps bad actors to facilitate what they want to do. Mark, can you start and share with us a little bit about how you think about technology and these challenges?
First of all, I think all of us have become very dependent on technology, and I do think that it can be a double-edged sword, but I also think it can be a good thing. And I think part of it is just having the right technology. And one of the things I've seen is having the appropriate budget for technology. And I think it's something where you have to have a 2 to 3 to 5 year plan, a business plan for what technology is going to cost, what you need it for, what are the threats you're seeing that where you think technology is going to help you. I really think it's important for those people that are creating that technology and the operational people to be talking to each other and discussing just what is it that operator needs in the way of technology is going to make their job better and make the people that they protect safer. Obviously technology, basic type of things, cameras and alarms are a really important element of of technology and how we protect everybody. Not everybody has to be protected 24/7. Not everybody has to be protected door to door. And if we can utilize technology to better protect people while they're at home, while they're at work, I'm all for that. At the same time, you don't want to have an over-reliance on technology. We all saw, last month in Spain and Portugal where power just totally went out. No technology was working, and we can have the best communication platforms in the world and the best other technology out there, but if you don't have power, it isn't going to do you any good. So you do have to have backup plans. And how are you going to communicate if you have no power? How are you going to what is your backup plan for ensuring that if the ball drops technology wise, you're still going to be able to do your job? And to me, having people on the ground working together with all of the technology that it has been tested, has been evaluated, and fits that particular. One size does not fit all. So you have to really make sure that technology is really what you need and not nice to have. I see a lot of people going out getting a lot of different technology, and some of it I think is really worthwhile, and others I think is just nice to have, but might be better off having another operator working as a security person than making that investment in that technology. But each company is going to be different, and I think with the advent of AI, I think that's something that can be very useful for us, but I can see that being turned against us very easily, and we need to make sure that we have the appropriate countermeasures in place to defend ourselves against, any type of AI technology that just is not going to keep our people safe.
Well, I want to put the genie back in the bottle on AI and ask you about that in just a moment. But Mark, you touched on a couple important things I want to just highlight before we pass it over to Don. Again, the importance of continuity planning for events like, as you noted, the power going out. How does your business run? How do you keep people safe is important. Investing properly in security. I think we hear a lot from CSOs, trying to get the attention of the C-suite and make those investments. Of late, that's been easier, but, hopefully they can keep their eye on the ball. And then Don, as you consider the question of technology in the security world, I think Mark was also alluding to the fact that many companies buy a product and then they don't integrate it very well, or they don't know quite how to use it. You've done so much work with technology startups in the security space. So I think this is really a particular area where you're highly knowledgeable. So would love to hear you on technology, but let's save the AI thing for the next question.
At the end of the day, we are huge advocates for new technology, emerging technology, advances. I mean, that's something as a firm we embrace wholeheartedly. In fact, we ingest and analyze huge swaths of the internet, and we utilize a vast number of tools, databases, systems around the world. It's our biggest expense as a firm. At any given day, that's by far our biggest expense. But, to your point, it's only as good as the user, right? So we've seen large clients spend ridiculous sums on the new platforms and new systems and new technology, from the gates guards and alarm systems all the way to emerging tech AI and all these databases. But at the end of the day, they need to have the people to run them, to analyze them, to assess them. And we see some of our clients who are receiving tens of thousands of alerts a day and hits a day across the board on suspicious activity, issues across the board, but don't have the team to assess what is valid, what is relevant, and what is emergent. So it really comes down to not just the technology that you utilize and are fielding, but also the staffing and the personnel that you have in-house. And if you can't have it, you can't do it in your own house, then you should be engaging with firms that can be force multipliers and could actually leverage their deep bench to manage the systems that you have. And so we see this all over. And I think that it's not just what is the best technology of the day, it's who's using it, how are they using it, and how effective is it? And to a certain extent, will it survive and will it be useful in the years to come? So you got to look down the road.
Great. No, and I think that tees it up really nicely to talk about AI, which I think warrants its own separate question and discussion. I don't think any of us know exactly what the impact of AI is going to be. It's quite scary. I tend to think that the human analytical side will still be really important, and it's essential to match up the human side and the AI side. But I'd like to invite each of you to talk a little bit about how protective intelligence has been shaped by AI. Mark, let's start with you. Do you think it's become more or less difficult in the age of AI to protect people? And what are your views on how to balance the needs of that AI aspect of things with the human side? I hope that's a fair question for you.
Yeah, and I'll say I am not. I'm far from an AI expert.
Me neither.
I've seen some of it work. I had a demonstration a few weeks ago on a brevity tool that took a document from 200 pages down to about 3 pages that I was pretty impressed with. And from that perspective, I think that would be great for an intelligence tool. I mean, I think intelligence is really important. I think that if the backbone of any executive protection program is going to have a strong intelligence program. Without that, you're bodyguards and you're not really a protection program in my view. And I think with this, with just the volume of information that is out there now, all the databases that people are looking at, all the social media that people are looking at, if AI can be used to reduce that information, I mean, you need this information really quickly. And if AI is a tool that can be used to reduce that information into something that can be discernible fairly quickly and get us the information that we need, that's what I would be looking for AI to do, is to get me that information much faster in a much briefer format. Because for all of us, when information comes in and it has anything to do with a threat against the people we protect, we need to figure out just what is the mitigation for that threat and who do we need to notify. We need to, give briefings to these people we protect. We need to figure out, are we going to have to scale up? And how long are we going to have to scale up for? We're going to need to know, are we going to bring other people in to support us? We need to know, are there going to be additional people that we weren't expecting to protect? So there's a lot of decisions that need to be made that I think AI can help us with. But again, to Don's earlier point, you're always going to need that human factor to double check to help, confirm that these conclusions we're coming up with from AI. And how is AI used against us? One of the biggest challenges I think for companies right now is so many companies are the target of nation states. And, identity verification is becoming a big challenge. And, these background companies we're using, I would say about 50 to 70% of the work they're doing is verifying identification. And I think that's something that these adversaries are utilizing is, how do they utilize AI to either do an identity takeover or, get themselves to a point where they can make some type of a intrusion into a company. So I think that's something we really need to pay attention to, and just how is AI enabling adversaries to make inroads and create an insider risk for companies and executives.
And there's the threat of deep fakes, which I think we're only scratching the surface on, where an executive might get a video call from someone who it looks and sounds exactly like their child, and be in a situation that could really create a lot of risk. So Don, you think a lot about the technology side of things here, and we use a lot of it at Interfor to monitor threats. So over to you on this.
Yeah, so as most of you know, Interfor is not just an investigative or intelligence agency. We're also a threat monitoring platform, right? So we're a global threat monitoring team. And while AI is instrumental in what we do day to day, primarily from the assessment and intake from massive sources of intelligence information on a hour by hour basis, it's not there yet. AI's tools, everything that we've seen today, and we've deployed and tested just about everything out there that is accessible to private entities. Even stuff that comes close to government grade. We've not utilized or seen anything that can answer for everything, solve for everything. And in fact, there are a lot of hallucinations and issues that we see from AI systems. So what do we have to do? And as many of you know, we protect and we support many athletes, celebrities, global CEOs, huge companies. And from our perspective, we have to still, to this very day, assign at least 7 analysts to every account because, at the end of the day, the systems are just not there. So it's a giant net, right? And we can use AI to grab and do sentiment analysis and grab keywords and look for certain patterns and all of those things which are critical. But at the end of the day, and to use the example that I always use is, we supporting an international music star who's on tour right now, we did a side-by-side assessment of the tools that are out there versus our analysts. And the tools were just sending us like a fire hose of information because people were tweeting and commenting in their geofenced area about how she bombed or this killed or using all these terms that were popping off red flags, and the team was getting flooded with information saying, oh, threat. But in reality, if a human could see that and say, just understanding syntax, understanding vernacular, understanding how people speak, and they notice that, okay, then these aren't threats. It's just people saying that she's not performing well tonight. So AI systems aren't there yet. Will they get there in the next couple of years? I'm sure they're going to build and build, but I think you'll never eliminate human analysts and human assessment teams and threat monitoring teams from the granularity of running and managing the end product that is the escalation to an EP team, an escalation to a close protection team, an escalation to local and state and federal law enforcement. That is still going to require a human interface. And
Yeah, I agree with you.
just to finish up,
Yeah.
AI is also being used as a tool by numerous criminal rings, bad guys. We work for brand management firms where we're assessing deep fakes and how they're being used to take someone's image and utilize celebrities' voice, image, or even creating video montages of them supporting a product or something and trying to commoditize something that they don't legally have the rights to. So if you see these things, they look real, they look perfect, they look exactly like celebrity X, Y, or Z, but at the end of the day, they're deep fakes. So this is the new front. And to Mark's point, these are being used to create personas, create individuals out of thin air, and being used to perpetuate frauds and crimes against banks, financial institutions, private equity groups, and just get embedded in a transaction. And that's where I think the new age of fraud is coming down the pike.
Yeah, this is such a fascinating area. The one thing I just want to grab a hold of that you were alluding to there, Don, is the idea that executive protection is a bit of an art, because you have all these great, technological aspects of how to keep executives safe. You guys have done an incredible job talking about the time we might escalate, and Mark was alluding to what might happen, adding other resources. But at the end of the day, if you have a busy executive who has a family, and all of us have certain preferences about how we travel, when we want our morning coffee. So the human side of this, understanding the executive and how to protect that person, is so key, because good EP is a little bit in the shadows. It should feel like they're continuing to live their life. Don, do you have any build there? And then I have one other comment I want to share from the audience.
Sure. I just want to say one thing. I mean, quite frankly, no one does protection better than the U.S. Secret Service, and I say that not just because Mark is on the phone and half the attendees are former special agents. But I will say, and no offense to our Israeli Shin Bet friends and our, all the other protective groups on this call, but I'll say, at the end of the day, when you're protecting an individual, that's one person. But really, our concern is it's the families as well, and that is kind of the low-hanging fruit. And
Yeah.
while, as Mark knows, when he was head of the Secret Service, he was responsible for the entirety of the first family, and not just one person, and that continues on. But your average CEO or celebrity, you're not always looking at or protecting their families, everyone else around them. And because of this age of interconnectedness and systems, using available PII that's out there in the deep and dark web, we could pretty much compile a hit profile or create a hit and map it out on any secondary person in the family, a wife, a spouse, a cousin, a child, based upon what they're doing through social media and what they're doing in the open web. And so that is a concern that many don't think about. And most of the CSOs on this call are responsible only for their corporate executives and not the extended family. So we need to think globally, and we need to think about how we protect our extended families as well that aren't covered by the corporate close protection team.
Yeah, and Mark, you and I, in chatting about this a little bit, you kind of opened my eyes to an important and growing point that, obviously as an EP provider, you want to make sure you're understanding the routes that someone's going and variety of risks. But now more than ever, the person that your executive is meeting with presents their own variety of risks that you have to consider as well. So that's challenging. And, happy to hear from you on that. But there was a comment that I think is a really good one, and I just want to stick with the idea of technology before I get into another question I'm kind of dying to ask you guys about. But this person in the audience noted how challenging it is that a majority of their cohort, they don't know how to leverage technology to build efficiency or how to prioritize it when they have a long list of responsibilities. I don't know if this is an impossible question, but how do you advise companies, and Mark, you advise a lot of them on these security issues, about how to balance an investment in a new security technology product with making sure they're doing the right thing on the human side? Apologies if this is a really difficult one, but I just wanted to drill down there a little bit.
No, I think that's a great question. It's a great point. I think it's a challenge for everybody. I think part of it is we have to keep in mind, who are we working for? We're working for people that are running a business, and security is not a revenue generator, but I think that it's a value added, and I think that we do everything we can to make sure they understand that it's a value added. But I do think the companies I see that do really well are with the security people that are able to put a business case together, tie that into a budget, and have a long-term plan, as far as, how they're going, again, it goes back to, and it's a cliche, but people, process, and technology. And how do you combine all that? And, how do you tie your strategic plan into the strategic plan of the company? And what is the future growth of that company going to look like? And what are you as security executives going to need to do to keep up with that growth, whether it be with technology or whether it be with people? How many people are you going to have to hire to keep up with that growth? And I think my experience has been that, the people that control the budget appreciate that when you can look at it from a longer term and not just go up to them and ask for, you need $10 million right now, for whatever the technology is or the people, but you have, maybe a longer term plan, a business plan, and metrics that go along with, showing, how many trips did that executive take, or executives take, how many advances did you do? As many metrics as you can get, I think really helps make an argument for, what you need to support that protection and that security. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there right now that, they're having challenges financially. And again, it's no secret. I think sometimes people can look at security as being a drain on their resources. And that's where I think we just have to be, extra aggressive in making our argument and bringing forward a good business plan for technology and how that's going to enable us to do our job better and make us more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point about tying it into the more broad goals of the company and understanding those challenges, perhaps thinking about like areas in the world that the company might expand to, different product areas that will expose it to new things. Don, what are your thoughts on trying to make good investments in technology and creating, efficiencies still that can work for a company?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's that difficult of a question. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the one thing we gloss over and most organizations maybe do once or maybe not do enough of is conducting a threat assessment. Really, at the end of the day, what are you protecting against? What are you protecting against today? What are you protecting against tomorrow? And what do you need to protect down the road? And I think if you understand all the threats and the threat vectors faced against you or you face as an organization, both from the executive protection level all the way to plant security and business continuity and all the other issues that may come to light in your organization, understanding that from day one and reinvesting in that threat assessment time and time again, on an annual basis, you will get better metrics. And with those metrics, you'll be able to make the case to, your CFO and your board and the C-suite and everyone else saying, listen, we're on the verge of expanding our facilities to country X because of that. And that's an area of instability. Or from the geopolitical risk, we're going to be expanding in these areas and we're going to expect more protests on US soil because of our engagement in this country in the Middle East. Assessing all that, understanding the threat vectors, knowing where your threats may come from, or will allow you to build a use case and an ROI on what we need to do today, what investments we need, and what technologies. And sometimes the answer is more people. Sometimes it's less people, and sometimes it's more technology or the right technology. And just because I think the big mistake that we all fall into, at least from the consulting side, is that we're always trying to give and provide our clients with the new and the latest and greatest technology and what's the best for this and what's the best for that because everyone else is using it or it's the shiny new toy. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's just an answer of ramping up humans, ramping up teams, or giving them additional training. Training has fallen fallen to the wayside in most organizations that we see. Maybe it's a function of just bringing in outsiders to train on the newest and the latest and the techniques and methodologies. Give your people the perspectives that they need to adapt with the challenges that are coming down the road. And I think that's a perspective that we all need to have as a global society.
No, that's excellent. I have a question that I want to get to, but we just got a really good one from the audience that I think is relevant right here. So I want to ask about it. It alludes to a statement that you made earlier, but I think it's very relevant, Mark, to what you were saying about tying it into the rest of the organization, as I grabbed a hold of when you were finished speaking there. The member of the audience is wondering that if what we're talking about here should be thought of as part of enterprise risk management. Should threat assessments be part of any ERM that a company engages? Let's start with you, Don.
I mean, it has to be. I mean, threat assessments are an integral part, and it's not just the threat assessments and all the EPPs that are happening and the assessments for, tax write-offs and, according to the tax code. It's not just about that, about how to shift, costs and risk along that side, financial. You need to have these assessments as part of your ERM. It has to be, because if not, then what are you building towards? What are you acquiring as far as technology? What are you leveraging as far as personnel? Where are your personnel and where are the threats? So if you're not analyzing these things on a continual basis and a recurring basis, then you're just taking a shot in the dark. And at the end of the day, as Mark knows better than I do, and most, I mean, you're really planning against the black swans and the kind of the lone wolf threats, and that can't necessarily be assessed once. How do your protective systems can't just say, you know what, we've looked at this 4 years ago, we're all set. We have the right deployment of personnel and technology. Yet, things change, and as we know, in this, divided world, and we're seeing all these kind of ideological threats and risks come down the pike. We need to reassess and relook at, these threats and bake them into our ERMs.
Yep, absolutely. Mark, anything to add on your side there?
I agree with everything, Don said. I mean, when you think about it, each company, no matter what they do, what vertical they're in, if something bad happens, it's all about business impact, right? What is the business impact going to be? Whether it, be some type of continuity of a business issue, what is the resiliency as far as getting up all of your systems, back up, crisis management, what is that crisis and what business impact does that have? What reputational impact does that have to your company? So I think, the more that the more these companies continue to grow, the more integration is required. And I think that all of this risk should be managed at an enterprise level, and everybody should be contributing to that.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I have a question here. Don, is there something you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, you just have to be also, let's be common sense. What happened to common sense? I mean, I think, we're seeing with this fear and this kind of knee-jerk reaction across the boards, people are losing common sense. One of our clients, world large enterprise, they sent executives via the company's jet to Southeast Asia on, a week-long trip. But because of lack of space on the corporate jet, they send the EP team commercial, right? So what happened was the obviously, as happens in this day and age, the commercial flights were delayed, some were canceled. The EP team came 2 days after the entirety of the trip started. So that's just common sense. I mean, send them before, put them on the jet. I mean, there's all these things that need to be looked at that from a common sense perspective, irrespective of what technology and processes you have in place. Sorry,
Yeah.
just had to.
No. That's not even getting into threats like, traveling to a place like China these days and making sure your tech is secure and all that. But let's not get started on all that. And if there are any more questions, please, just a reminder to put them in the Q&A. Don, in the piece that you and I authored in The Hill today, we talk about the rise of legalized gambling and the threats that has brought about. I personally wanted to see gambling legalized. It's brought in tax revenue. It's taken things out of the shadows, but there's always unintended consequences with these types of things. And what we're seeing now is a number of athletes come out saying that, when they blow a game, when they miss a shot, they're getting really vicious death threats online. And many of these threats, as we note in the piece, are saying things that are disturbingly accurate about these athletes' homes, their lives, their families. Wonder if you could both speak a little bit about that trend, and how that's presented a new risk when it comes to protecting people. And if you could define what the term PII is and how it affects people's lives. Well, Don, why don't we stay with you for a second, then we'll get to Mark.
Sure, sure. I mean, listen, gambling brings out, the best and the worst in people, right? You win, you're happy. You lose, you're miserable. And the problem is gambling amongst those that don't have the funds to gamble or shouldn't be gambling at all creates more concern. So I'm not surprised that athletes and celebrities are being subjected to this type of animosity and antagonism. But in this world, just about any and all information about you, no matter who you are, is available on some level, whether it's in the deep and dark web, whether it's through data brokers, whether it's through open sources, Google, you name it. We find privileged and personal information that should not be, in any other place. Like I'm sitting here in Germany right now. There's a lot of privacy laws and regulations that prohibit this type of information from even being disseminated or maintained. But the large data providers and web support companies and data centers are transiting and distributing huge amounts of our privileged and private information. And so we can, if anyone knows what they're doing, and this is the concern. I mean, you talk about United Healthcare, you talk about all these other assaults and attacks. They're developing a lot of information about a celebrity or about an individual. They'll know where they are, where they live, what car they drive. All of this is available. If they can't figure it out on them because they are using any number of PII removal systems or programs, they're doing it about this on the spouse, or they're doing it. They know their adult child lives with them. So, and those people and those individuals may not have protected backgrounds. So it is a great concern to us. Gambling is just kind of the fuel on the fire. I don't have a problem with gambling in and of itself. I just have, an issue with the fact that there are people who are now more desperate, will engage in more volatile and concerning behavior.
Mark, what are your thoughts on this trend in gambling and the amount of PII online?
Yeah, I think, sports in general, I think that fans have just become so much more aggressive over the last 3 to 5 years. You see so much, fan intrusion on the fields. It's just become a very aggressive and thing to deal with. And then couple that with gambling. You think about some poor 27-year-old kid who's a professional golfer with a 4-foot putt, and what that putt may mean to somebody if it's made or not made. And I just read an article a few weeks ago about a pitcher who just blew up and I think allowed 5 runs the ninth inning or something like that. And he came out publicly and just talked about the impact that it's having on he and his family. And he was getting knocked around, people showing up at his home, and that goes back to the whole PII thing. These data aggregators just out there selling this information. It's all being posted. It's pretty easy to find just about anybody nowadays. And even if you don't find it on open source, there's a lot of people out there that have access to proprietary databases. So this is really putting people at risk. And not only that, and one of the things we talk to people about is social media, what they're putting out, but not only what they're putting out, but what their friends and family are putting out. And you're seeing it's pretty publicly available. I mean, if somebody has a baseball game at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, more than likely there's nobody going to be at their home. You're seeing home robberies now because people are taking advantage of that. So we forget that these athletes are in their 20s and 30s, and even college athletes are even younger. It's putting just an incredible amount of pressure on them to perform, and the risk that's out there for them if they don't perform according to what one lunatic fan may want, how they want them to perform, just creates a lot more of a threat for them. And I just think it's a very challenging proposition for them to be able to perform at the highest level all the time, knowing that every little thing they do is going to be judged, and there could be a repercussion because if they don't perform the way someone's looking for them to perform.
I mean, I agree. I mean, an interesting thing, Jeremy, just jumping in here, is as a firm, when we conduct protective intelligence report, when we create protective intelligence reports or threat assessments for our clients, an interesting thing that we do and historically have done is look at the subject and see what we can find about that subject online and through the deep and dark web and through all the different systems. But we do it in two ways. One, wearing our hat as a investigator, an investigative agency with access to tremendous resources. What level of information can we find out about that individual through our methodologies and technologies? Then we put the bad actor hat on and say, what can we find? What PII, which is personally identifiable information, what can we find about that person just using open sources? And in the past, it used to be that our protected and secured systems would give us the lion's share of the data against where Mark Sullivan lives, what he drives, who his spouse, the whole family, et cetera. But in this day and age, we're seeing the open source and the open and even the cheap paid databases have more and more information and that provide threat vectors towards our subject. So it's almost balanced these days, which is more troubling than ever before. And with the explosion of social media, I mean, people are also making silly mistakes. We had a corporate officer who has done a tremendous job hiding all his information and shielding everything online. And independently wealthy individual, has a family office, bought a new plane, et cetera, but did everything through a BVI cutout and the corporate, all the appropriate things that should have been done to protect that asset. And then what happened was family trip to the Caribbean, and his child, a 16-year-old son, took a selfie in front of the plane saying, "I'm about to board Dad's new plane," and the tail number was visible in the image that was then posted online. So if anyone, as many of you investigators know online, once you have that tail number, it's just a matter of time of, figuring out who owns it, et cetera, and now you can track it. So all the, tens of thousands of dollars that went into securing the purchase of this plane was thrown out the window because now the world knew what the tail number was. So you need common sense, but you're kind of the rest of the family has to understand, how do we protect the entirety of the family? And then, by extension of that, the corporate entities that are attached to the family. So
yeah. Lots of great details there. One of the things that just kind of lingered with me, Mark, when you were talking about a pitcher being harassed like that, it occurred to me, which pitcher? Because, I'm an enormous baseball fan and I've been following this story very closely. And there are several of them that have reported some, very vicious death threats based on their performance. So, we can talk a lot here about ways to protect yourself, your executives, technology, but there's something very wrong with the culture right now. And we talk about this in the piece as well. I have one more question to get to, but there's a comment here from the audience. I want to ask Mark and Don to just very briefly answer this one, because I think I have a good closing question for all of this. But this member of the audience was asking about the United Healthcare shooter and wondering if I'm not aware of this, if there were any previous communications or threats to the CEO. Was that person on a known path of progression towards this event, or were they one of the individuals that seems to have come out of the ether that you alluded to before as the hardest to protect against? So again, really quickly, what have you heard about that? Don, how about you first there?
So obviously, we're not involved in this investigation. It's still an ongoing criminal matter, and it's being adjudicated or taken through the court system as well. But from my understanding, from what we've heard to date, I don't know that he telegraphed his play, but I think that his mental decline and a lot of the information that subsequently was found in manifestos and et cetera were not necessarily broadly blitzed and put on social media. So I've come to hear that was a maladjusted, he was an EDP, he's an emotionally disturbed person, but I don't know how much of that was projected outwardly towards United Healthcare directly.
Yeah. Mark, have you heard anything different?
Yeah, no, what I had heard that, he was vocal within a certain circle about his disdain for the healthcare industry, but no direction of interest towards anybody in particular is what I had been told.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard as well. So wrapping things up here, both of you do a ton of work protecting high-profile individuals, senior executives, celebrities, high net worth individuals. I mean, Mark, we're talking about the former presidents of the United States. So what can you share, though, as we wrap things up? There are a lot of people here from the corporate security world who think about those things specifically, but we have others that are, in the business world or everyday people. What are your tips to protect yourself in this era of ideological violence and divisive times we're living through? Mark, you were alluding to a little bit of that with social media. I'll go to you first to wrap things up, and also feel free to share any final thoughts on your mind.
No, well, I think, again, I think that you have to have the people that you protect. I think they have to buy into that protection. I think they have to understand it. And I think there has to be that one person that is protecting that person that they have chemistry with, and they can have candid conversations with each other. And I think there needs to be a integrated support staff for that. Intelligence is really, as we talked about before, is really important. And I think that, as I'd mentioned earlier, I think it has to be scalable. I think if you did a threat assessment on the majority of CEOs out there, I think you would come back that it's a low threat level, but there'd be a caveat. And the caveat would be that threat level is going to rise depending on controversial issues, depending on maybe that person's religion, their political views, where they're traveling to, what they're going to be doing, if they're going to be at a high profile event, how the business is doing. So I think there's a lot of things again, it's just not all one size fits all, and it's not always going to be the same. And you have to be able to know when you have to raise your protection and lower the protection and just go back to normal. But I think getting the buy-in from the CEO and from the executives is really important. And I think that having that chemistry and having that trust, because everyone's going to be doing this a different way. Some people might be doing it armed, some people might not be armed. It might be a combination of both. You might be using some contractors, but I think that more and more executives are seeing the value in having security with them, and I think they're also seeing how multidimensional these people are that are providing protection can be to them, that they're good with logistics and they're good with not only security issues, but they help get them around, and they're just a real value add.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to highlight something you were alluding to earlier, specifically for those in the audience. When it comes to social media, if you're going on vacation and if you start posting pictures that you're away, it just tells people, if you have an open profile, that you're not in your home. Now, maybe I'm about to go on vacation and someone will be staying in my home, so it shouldn't be a big concern in every case. And you can go ahead and post your vacation pics, but you want to be security minded. When that goes into cyber and day-to-day security awareness. And one of the key things to do is just note that everything you're putting out there on social media can be used against you in those kind of ways. So I would urge everybody to keep that in mind, whether you're high profile or not. Don, I'll turn it over to you for final thoughts on some safety tips for everyday people, and if you want to just wrap things up for us on this excellent conversation, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. First of all, I'll say that, in my opinion and the opinion of the firm, I think complacency is the enemy of corporate security. I mean, at the end of the day, we ramp up during times of escalated threat, and we get, everyone gets nervous, and then the executives get, they ruffle and at the intrusions and the concerns. So complacency is always the issue from my perspective. And so I think what change needs to occur, systemically, is the understanding and appreciation that the model will change on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, depending on the threats facing your organization and what you're doing as a business. So to Mark said a number of times, there's not one size fits all, and that is the the true aspect of it all. So I would say, if we're going to do anything differently, I would say look at the extended families, look at the entirety of your families in the org chart to understand that the risks and threats are not just centered on the executive themselves, but also their extended family, and also to reassess on an ongoing basis what level of security needs to be presented and be ready to scale down. I mean, I think, and everyone's afraid of that. Am I the one that's going to scale down security because, what if something happens? That will always be the case, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to scale down in order to scale up as well. So there needs to be that dynamic perspective. And everyday humans, I will say this, I'll leave, and I say this, I'll get off my soapbox in a minute, but I will say the one thing that really gets to me, and I don't understand why, the rest of society, the global society appreciates, is that the level of information that exists in the deep and dark web, and the open web, is astronomical on every single one of us on this call and those that we are responsible for protecting and our families. If you are not engaged in a comprehensive process of taking that down, identifying it, assessing it on a monthly, ongoing basis, then you're not protecting yourselves and your families the way you should. And this is whether you're a corporation, whether you're an individual, a retiree, it doesn't matter. But this information is being used by bad actors to defraud, to pursue, to scam, and in the worst case scenarios, to attack. So I think we need to appreciate that as a global society, even in countries and areas that have strict privacy rules, because just because you have a strict privacy rule doesn't mean this information doesn't exist. It isn't being commoditized by bad actors. So that's my 2 cents on that. With that, I would like to thank Mark, very much. Mark's a legend in the industry, as many of you know. He's a good friend of the firm. We consider him to be a close advisor, so we appreciate any and all time he has. If you guys have any additional questions, comments, concerns, please email them in. Please send it to us. All of you will be getting a link with both of our, of this session, and also with the white paper eventually, and our op-ed. But Mark, thank you very much. Jeremy, tremendous job as well. And to all of you who have joined us around the world, thank you very much. And please do not stay strangers. Keep in touch with us. We'd love to keep the dialogue going.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.